Every year, thousands of people go missing. Most of them are found. Some aren't. And some go missing under a very particular set of circumstances. David Paulides, author of the popular Missing 411 series, chronicles these cases in detail. And some of them are exceptionally strange. Regardless of whether you're a fan of Paulides or not, it should be noted that he is an advocate for those who've lost loved ones, for mental health, and individual personal freedom. Today's story is about a 2-year-old boy who went missing in the rugged hills of Ritter, Oregon. You won't want to miss the conclusion of this story, so stay tuned. If you are enjoying what I'm doing with these Moonlit tales, make sure to like and subscribe, and make sure to get your name at the end of each of these videos in the credits as an orb by supporting me by joining right now for 99 cents a month. Without further ado, this is the incredible journey of Keith Parkins. Many people who research this story often cite that Keith Parkins went missing on April 10th, 1952, but they most likely got that information from David Paulides' documentary Missing 411. However, I have just a quick point of clarification. Many newspapers covering the story state that Keith's disappearance in 1952 occurred on a Wednesday, which would be the 9th of April. Now, it could just be an honest mistake propagated by several different news outlets, but I think it's more than that. It's a little detail, I know, but these matters are important, and if not for the sake of consistency, for another matter, which I'll explain at the end of this video. Let's begin. Edna and Alan Parkins and their 3 children, Michael, 6, Terry, 5, and Keith, 2, were visiting Edna's parents in Ritter, Oregon on their family ranch. It was Easter time, and snow was on the ground. On the morning of the 9th of April, which was a Wednesday, the 3 brothers had gone out to explore the ranch, particularly around the barn. There was a brand new calf born recently, and they wanted to see it. Around noon, the 3 were still out playing, and Edna was in the house making lunch. She then called the 3 boys in. Michael and Terry showed up for lunch, but Keith was absent. Not too concerned, but when she asked where Keith was, they said that he went around the barn the long way. After a few minutes, he still never showed up, and so she went out and looked for him. And he wasn't on the other side of the barn. He wasn't in the barn. He wasn't around the house. In fact, he wasn't anywhere to be found. Keith was missing. After several minutes of looking around unsuccessfully around the ranch, she started to panic, and it quickly became clear that something was seriously wrong. She called the authorities. Now, this was before search and rescue, but within a couple of hours, a team of about 200 people, made up of local authorities, neighbors, and anyone who could lend a hand. As the paper said, just about every man in Ritter was on the ranch searching for Keith. Alan was also able to get several, if not many, of his co-workers to join in on the search. He was a prison guard in Walla Walla, Washington. Edna recalled that even though it wasn't a trained group of searchers, they knew what they were doing. They spread out within speaking distance of one another and covering large swaths of ground, moved forward a few steps, looked down and around, and then continuing as they moved forward in every direction, the barn being the starting point. The official search began around 2 p.m. and went long into the night. At some point, someone found about 4 miles away from the ranch house children's footprints to the northeast, right about here. They thought they were getting close, but the tracks were only visible for a short period of time, and they vanished. Several more hours went by, and his trail just was nowhere to be found. It went cold. And it was also very cold. The night crept in while searchers were trekking through fields of mud, brush, rugged canyon terrain, and snow-capped hills that chilled the searchers to the bone. The search continued through the night and temperatures dropped well below freezing. The night was long and spirits were fading. Alan Parkins, Keith's father, was pressing forward with the horrible and encroaching realization that if they didn't find Keith soon, it would only be a body that they find. And at 6:45 a.m., Charles Schoen in Skull Canyon in the Blue Mountains found Keith's body. He yelled out, and Alan, who was just 100 yards away, rushed frantically over. 2-year-old Keith was found face down in the snow, and he was frozen solid. Shockingly, it was about 6 miles west of where his footprints were originally spotted. Strangely, his jacket and his hat were both off and laying next to his body, and there was a tear on his overalls. Picking Keith's frozen body up and into his arms, Alan noted that his skin was blue, his eyes were closed, and he was as stiff as a board. All the things you'd expect from someone who had died of hypothermia. Regardless, Alan desperately ran with Keith in his arms, non-stop 4 miles back to his house, where they then rushed him to a nearby airstrip where Edna was already waiting with pilot Jack Lemberger. From there, they were met by an ambulance at the Pendleton airport, where he was then rushed to the local hospital. And it was at that hospital, in Pendleton, where Keith would open his eyes, asking for some water to drink. He was alive. He suffered scratches on his arms and on his face, severe dehydration and frostbite, but otherwise he was carefully watched over and nursed back to complete health. He made a full recovery. His mother, Edna, stayed by his side the whole time. She said later in an interview that she never gave up hope, but Alan, the one who had to find his frozen body, admitted that when he first saw Keith, he thought for sure he was dead. Now, that's the story, but let's just take a moment and evaluate what actually happened. 2-year-old Keith was lost in the Blue Mountains for 19 hours overnight in sub-freezing temperatures and had appeared to have traveled upwards of 9 miles, but that 9 miles is as the crow flies. Les Stroud's Survivor Man hiked the same path from the barn to the footprints to where he was found, and given all of the hills, the brush, the fences, the valleys, and the rugged terrain, one newspaper even saying that he crossed an icy river, Keith would have had to have potentially traveled upwards of 12 to 13 miles to make it where he did. We don't know what happened, but Stroud said whatever did happen to Keith, it was something else, meaning it's something very out of the ordinary. Keith simply couldn't have done this journey on his own. In order to make sense of this story, people have suggested that he was kidnapped, but because of the search that started so quickly, the kidnapper wasn't able to get very far and abandoned Keith, and then maybe even potentially posed as a searcher at one point. Others think that he was taken by a large cat. It's reported that Keith did happen to say that he was scratched by a cat, but people think that there was a cat around the barn that had maybe scratched him before he disappeared. And that was one of the few things that Keith ever said about the event. He didn't remember anything. Even in his later years, nothing came to him. He has no idea what happened to him in those 19 hours. Others grasping at straws to explain this fantastic scenario. They turn to things like he was taken by Bigfoot, or even abducted by aliens, or stepped into a portal somehow and spit out miles away. Although I do believe in aliens, Bigfoot, and portals, no doubt, I think it's a mistake to turn to these fantastic solutions without first exhausting every possible alternative scenario. Let me tell you what I think happened. This is the map of the area. This is a barn. The 3 boys were playing in this barn. The mom calls them for lunch. And so maybe Keith headed out of the barn first to go to his mom to get lunch. However, he may have gotten turned around, a very small child in a big barn, and maybe he heard the voice of his mother on this side of the barn. And he's 2 years old. He doesn't know the difference between right and left, but intuitively, he may have known that to exit the barn and get to the house, he should turn left. And if he thought, if he got turned around in the barn, maybe he went out this way and headed in a northerly direction, turning left out of the barn to go to where he thought the house was. Now, maybe he left first, and his 2 brothers, Michael and Terry, they were a little bit older and they knew that they weren't turned around and they went out the other way. But they went out the other way and they looked and they figured, oh, Keith is going around the long way of the barn for whatever reason. And so Michael and Terry make it to the house. Mom asks them, where's Keith? They said, oh, he's coming, but he went around the long way. After a few minutes, obviously Keith never showed up. But Mom goes out to look and he's nowhere to be seen. There could have been a half an hour between when the boys made it back to the house. Edna actually went out and looked for Keith. We don't really know. But if Keith was heading in the direction of what he thought to be his mom's house or where his mom was, and he wasn't getting there, you look around, kind of maybe even to the west and to the north and to the east, and not seeing anything and thinking he's heading in the right direction and getting scared and panicking, he starts running faster. And he doesn't go to point B, where the footprints were found. I think that Keith went directly from the barn, point A, to point C, just a few miles away, and that's where he passed out in the snow. But what about the footprints? Now, okay, so I spoke with Michael Rutter, a wildlife expert and photographer, and he suggested the possibility that maybe one of the searchers thought they saw Keith's tracks. Now you might be thinking, what could make a human-looking track? So keep in mind that Keith's shoes didn't have grip or tread on them at all. They were flat. They were completely flat, and they were a little pointed at the end. This is what a calf track looks like, especially if it was a young calf. It should be noted that the tracks were reported in the midst of a herd of cattle. And adding on to this, if they were in a muddy field and there was a patch of snow and the calf walked through the patch of snow, maybe they thought, desperately hoping to find Keith, that they saw Keith's footprints. And you might be thinking, like, how could a bunch of locals and ranchers mistake the footprints? There weren't just ranchers searching. There were also prison guards searching. There were also people who were very close to Alan searching, and potentially they wouldn't have had a very good expertise in footprints. Somebody may have shown them the type of shoe that he was wearing, and the similarity is a little bit uncanny. And you might be saying, that's a little bit of a stretch, but on top of all of that, I can't find any sources of who actually reported the footprints. Documentary, they didn't mention who reported the tracks or if anybody even corroborated that somebody saw tracks. It's just kind of one of those things that got out, and then all of the newspapers kind of just rolled with it. Nobody knows who reported the tracks, but we know the name of the pilot who flew Keith to the Pendleton Hospital, and we know the name of the person who actually found Keith Parkins. We know lots of other details about this story, but no name comes forward when we're talking about who reported tracks at point B. So given all of that information, I think it's much more likely that Keith walked out of the barn went to the left, thinking he was going towards his mother's voice, and he just ran in that direction as hard as he could, and it must have been terrifying. To me, that is the most reasonable explanation. Either way, though, whether my explanation is correct or there was some more fantastic explanation like aliens or Bigfoot or even the cat, which, by the way, is almost unheard of if a cat would have taken him in that manner and not torn a lot more of his clothing or killed Keith in the process. Either way, it's a miracle that Keith survived, that he was found, and that he came back, and I'm grateful that he was, because as you know, not everybody is so fortunate. In fact, Keith is alive today at age 67. In 2019, he did an exclusive interview with David Paulides for the Missing 411 documentary, which I highly recommend you go and watch. You can watch it on YouTube, along with his other documentary, Missing 411, The Hunted. Today is a little bit shorter of a story, but that is the story of Keith Parkins. And if you enjoyed this Missing 411 episode, make sure to like and subscribe. And support me on Patreon, where you can get your name right here alongside all of these amazing people, along with several other really cool perks. And make sure to stay for right after these credits for a teaser of next week's episode. Stephen Kubacki was strong, smart, athletic, he was well-liked, had lots of girlfriends, and one day he decided to cross-country ski around Lake Michigan, as people do. Days later, however, his skis and all of his belongings that he took with him were found in a snowbank, and his trail led straight into the icy lake. The police investigation concluded that for whatever reason, Stephen took his skis off and tried to cross Lake Michigan, and he fell through the ice and drowned. But that is only the beginning of this unbelievable true story. Tune in next week to see what happened.